How much pain can one heart endure before it shatters or fights back? In the shadows of Westwood, Anita Johnson's quiet life was torn apart in a single night of unimaginable cruelty. What began as a plea for freedom spiraled into a nightmare and almost broke her spirit. But from her tears rose a fight that would awaken a community and challenge a corrupt system. Welcome to our channel, where stories come alive and inspire change. Here, we bring you tales of triumph, courage, and heartwarming resilience that resonate deep within. Your support means the world to us. If this tale resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments, like the video, subscribe and share in your community to effect protection for the vulnerable. The bell rang at Westwood Elementary School, signaling the end of the day. Anita Johnson, a vibrant 30-year-old teacher, smiled warmly at her students as they packed up their books and streamed out the door. She loved teaching, and the laughter of the children filled her with joy. It was her first pregnancy, and though her belly wasn't yet visible, she felt every flutter of excitement for the life growing inside her. As Anita erased the day's lessons from the chalkboard, her co-worker Mrs. Carter walked in. "Anita, you're glowing. Motherhood already suits you." Anita laughed. "Thanks, Mrs. Carter. I'm trying not to stress, but it's a little nerve-wracking." "You'll be amazing," Mrs. Carter said. Later that evening, Anita prepared a simple dinner at home, humming softly as she chopped vegetables. Her thoughts wandered to her husband, David, a hard-working man who always did his best for their small family. Suddenly, her phone buzzed on the counter. She wiped her hands quickly and answered. "Hello, Mrs. Johnson." The voice on the other end sounded unfamiliar and cold. "Your husband, David Johnson, has been arrested and is being held at Oak Ridge Police Station." Anita froze, her heart pounding. "Arrested? For what?" "Suspected theft at his workplace," the voice said flatly before disconnecting. Anita wasted no time. She called her neighbor, Mrs. Robinson, to watch her young niece, who she often babysat, and rushed to the station. The Oak Ridge Police Station was dimly lit and intimidating. Inside, the air was heavy with the stale scent of cigarettes and frustration. A few officers milled around, giving Anita a dismissive glance as she approached the front desk. "I'm here for my husband, David Johnson," Anita said firmly, though her voice quivered slightly. "I was told he's been arrested." The officer at the desk barely looked up from his paperwork. "What's it to you?" "I'm his wife," Anita replied. "Please, I need to see him." He snorted. "Wait over there. Someone'll get to you when they can." Anita clenched her fists, trying to stay calm. Minutes felt like hours before another officer finally led her to the holding cells. There she saw David. His head hung low, his shirt rumpled, and his face itched with exhaustion. "David," she cried, rushing toward the bars. "Anita," David said softly, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and shame. "I didn't do it. I swear." "I know you didn't," Anita said firmly. "We'll fix this." David slipped his phone through the bars. "Call my brother, Gerald. He'll know what to do." As Anita stepped into a quiet corner of the station to make the call, she felt every eye in the room on her. She dialed Gerald's number with trembling fingers. "Anita." Gerald's voice came through the line. "What's going on?" "David's been arrested," Anita explained quickly. "They're accusing him of theft. We need your help." Before she could finish, a booming voice interrupted. "You can't use your phone here." Anita turned to see Officer Goodhead, the station's divisional police officer, striding toward her. His face was a mask of anger, his towering frame casting a shadow over her. "I'm calling my husband's brother," Anita said, holding her ground. "He's innocent." Goodhead's eyes narrowed. "I said, hand over the phone. Now." Anita hesitated, clutching the phone tightly. "This is a mistake. My husband didn't do anything wrong." Goodhead's voice dropped, low and menacing. "You don't get to make the rules here. Hand over the phone." No, Anita said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I have the right to. Before she could finish, Goodhead snatched the phone from her hand, his grip harsh and unforgiving. You think you can walk in here and tell me how to run my station? He snarled. You're just like the rest of them, always playing the victim. Anita's breath caught in her throat. I'm pregnant, she said, stepping back. Please, don't do this. Goodhead's eyes flashed with something cruel. Pregnant? That's not my problem. Maybe you'll learn to respect authority. Anita's heart pounded as Officer Goodhead's cold voice echoed through the station. Deal with her. Two officers stepped forward, their faces devoid of empathy. Anita took a step back, her hands protectively cradling her stomach. I'm pregnant, she cried, desperation lacing her voice. Please, don't touch me. The officers paused for a moment, glancing at Goodhead, whose expression remained stern and unyielding. She's bluffing, he said dismissively. Show her we mean business. Before Anita could say another word, rough hands grabbed her arms, yanking her forward. She struggled, her voice trembling with fear. Let go of me. I haven't done anything wrong. David's voice erupted from his cell, filled with panic. Stop. She's pregnant. Please, don't hurt her. His pleas fell on deaf ears as the officers shoved Anita into a desk. Her hip struck the edge with a thud, and a sharp jolt of pain shot through her abdomen. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched her stomach. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm begging you, don't hurt my baby. One of the officers sneered, shoving her back against the counter. Anita's vision blurred as a slap landed across her cheek, the sting radiating through her face. David's cries grew louder. Anita, stop. She hasn't done anything. He rattled the bars of his cell, his voice cracking with despair. Leave her alone. Goodhead approached, leaning down to Anita's level as she cowered on the floor, cradling her stomach. Maybe now you'll learn some respect, he said, his tone cold and unfeeling. The officers dragged her behind the counter and left her there, her body trembling with pain and fear. Anita could hear David's voice, muffled but relentless, as he continued shouting her name. She wanted to reassure him, to say something, but the ache in her abdomen silenced her. Hours passed. The station grew quieter as the night wore on, but Anita's pain intensified. Sharp cramps racked her body, and when she shifted slightly, she felt the horrifying warmth of blood. Help, she whispered weakly, her voice hoarse from crying. Please, somebody help me. The officer on duty, seated at the front desk, barely glanced her way. Quiet down, he muttered, flipping through a newspaper. Please, Anita begged, her voice trembling. I'm bleeding. I need a doctor. The officer shrugged. What do you expect me to do? It's the middle of the night. Just sit tight. Anita's head fell back against the wall, tears streaming silently down her face. She thought of her baby, the tiny life she had carried with so much hope. The pain in her heart matched the agony in her body. The next morning, a junior officer unlocked the door to the counter area. You can go now, he said gruffly, avoiding her gaze. Anita struggled to her feet, her legs unsteady beneath her. The officer didn't offer to help. As she stumbled toward the door, he muttered under his breath, Maybe next time, you'll think twice about defying authority. Consider this a lesson learned. Anita didn't respond. Her mind was clouded with exhaustion and pain as she made her way out of the station. The sunlight stung her eyes, and the world outside felt strangely distant. She knew she needed to go to the hospital, but a sense of duty pulled her toward Oakwood Elementary. She couldn't afford to miss signing in. Her students depended on her, and she didn't want anyone to worry. By the time Anita arrived at the school, her body felt like it was on the verge of collapse. She leaned against her desk, her hands trembling as she signed her name in the attendance book. Anita, are you okay? Mrs. Carter's voice broke through the haze. I'm fine, Anita said weakly, though she knew she wasn't. Before she could say anything more, a wave of dizziness overtook her. She gasped, clutching the edge of the desk for support, but her legs gave out beneath her. The last thing she heard was Mrs. Carter shouting her name as everything went dark. Anita awoke in a sterile hospital room, the scent of antiseptic filling the air. She blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights and saw Mrs. Carter sitting beside her, worry etched across her face. "Anita," Mrs. Carter said softly, "you're at the hospital. You collapsed at school." Anita tried to sit up, but a nurse gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Take it easy," the nurse said. The doctor entered the room, his expression somber. "Mrs. Johnson," he began carefully, "I'm so sorry. You've lost the pregnancy." The words hit Anita like a blow. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach as tears welled in her eyes. She felt an ache so profound it seemed to swallow her whole. Mrs. Carter held her hand as Anita sobbed. "I tried to protect my baby," Anita whispered. "I tried." One thought burned brightly in her mind. This isn't over. I will fight for justice. The day after Anita was discharged from the hospital, her story began to spread. A local journalist, deeply moved by her plight, arrived at Anita's modest home in Westwood. The cameras rolled as Anita, seated on her couch with her hands folded tightly, recounted the nightmare she had endured. Her voice cracked as she described the attack, the pain, and the devastating loss of her first pregnancy. Tears streamed down her face as she said, "I tried to tell them. I begged them to stop, but they didn't care. My baby was innocent, and they took that life from me." The journalist posted the interview on social media with the caption, #JusticeForAnita, a pregnant woman brutalized by police. Within hours, it went viral. Comments poured in from people expressing their anger, heartbreak, and support for Anita. Activists picked up the story, and protests were organized. By the next day, a crowd of hundreds gathered outside the Oak Ridge police station. Protesters held signs that read, "Stop police brutality, justice for Anita, and protect black mothers." The chants of "No justice, no peace" echoed through the streets of Westwood. Meanwhile, David remained in custody, his frustration and fear mounting. As the protests gained momentum, a coalition of civil rights lawyers, led by attorney Layla Simmons, began applying pressure on the police department. Simmons secured an emergency court hearing to argue that David's detention was unlawful and based on fabricated charges. The hearing brought further media scrutiny to the case. The judge, presented with the lack of evidence against David, ordered his immediate release. When David walked out of the Oak Ridge police station into the waiting arms of Anita, the crowd erupted into cheers. The reunion was bittersweet. Tears flowed freely as Anita whispered, "They can't break us. We'll fight this together." With the help of Simmons, Anita filed a formal complaint against Officer Goodhead and the Oak Ridge police station. The legal battle wasn't just about her personal ordeal. It was about holding the system accountable. Simmons was relentless, working with community leaders to gather testimonies from other residents who had suffered at the hands of Goodhead and his officers. As news of the case grew, more people came forward with shocking stories of abuse and intimidation. As the investigation deepened, troubling details about Officer Goodhead's history came to light. Internal police records, reluctantly released under pressure, revealed that Goodhead had faced multiple complaints over the years. Most of the complaints were disturbingly similar. Allegations of excessive force, verbal abuse, and misconduct, many of them involving black women. A chilling pattern emerged. Goodhead often targeted women who were alone or vulnerable, using his position of power to humiliate and control them. Yet, none of the complaints had ever resulted in disciplinary action. They had been quietly swept under the rug by the department. One night, as Anita sat with David and Simmons, new evidence came to light. Simmons placed a folder on the table. "This changes everything," she said, her tone grim but determined. The documents inside revealed that David's arrest had been a setup. Warehouse employees testified that Goodhead had coerced the warehouse manager into fabricating a theft accusation against David. The motive? Extortion. Goodhead had been running a scheme for years, using his badge to shake down local businesses. Managers were pressured to pay bribes in exchange for Goodhead protecting their operations or ensuring their employees weren't harassed. When David's manager refused to pay, Goodhead retaliated by orchestrating David's arrest. "This isn't just about you, Anita," Simmons said. "Goodhead has been exploiting this entire community. He thought no one would stand up to him. But now, we have the truth." The revelation shocked Anita. The pain of her ordeal now intertwined with anger and determination. Goodhead hadn't just abused his power. He had weaponized it to prey on innocent people like her and David. "People need to know this," Anita said, her voice trembling with conviction. "They will," Simmons replied. "We're taking this to court, and we're taking it to the public. The world will see who Goodhead really is." As news outlets picked up the story, the protests grew larger. Westwood became a focal point in the national conversation about police brutality and corruption. Journalists, activists, and allies from across the country descended on the neighborhood, amplifying Anita's fight for justice. Community members painted murals honoring Anita and her lost child, with the words "Justice for Anita" prominently displayed. Churches, schools, and local businesses joined the movement, organizing vigils and marches. In the face of overwhelming evidence, the police department announced an internal investigation into Goodhead's conduct. But for Anita and her supporters, this was only the beginning. They wanted real accountability, not just for Goodhead, but for the system that had enabled him. The courtroom was packed to capacity, with every seat filled and people spilling into the aisles. The tension was palpable as Anita sat beside her attorney, Layla Simmons. Anita's hands were clasped tightly, her knuckles white, as she drew strength from the supportive presence of her husband, David, seated beside her. His hand rested on hers, offering silent reassurance that they would face whatever came next together. The trial had been grueling, but Anita's legal team had left no stone unturned. Witness after witness took the stand, recounting harrowing experiences of Officer Goodhead's abuse. Each testimony painted a picture of a man who had exploited his badge to oppress and intimidate, targeting the most vulnerable in the community. Medical records and expert testimony confirmed the physical trauma Anita had suffered and the devastating loss of her pregnancy. The footage captured by bystanders, showing Anita's pleas and Goodhead's merciless response, was played for the court. Gasps and murmurs filled the room as the jury and spectators were confronted with the undeniable truth of what had transpired that fateful night. When it was Anita's turn to testify, the room fell silent. Her voice trembled as she began, but as she spoke, her pain transformed into resolve. "I begged them to stop," she said, her gaze steady as she looked toward the jury. "I told them I was pregnant. I told them I was in pain. But they didn't care. To them, I wasn't a person. I wasn't a mother. I was just someone they thought they could silence. They took my child from me, but they will never take my voice." After hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Anita held her breath as the foreperson read the verdict. "We find the defendant, Officer Goodhead, guilty of all charges." A sob escaped Anita's lips, a mixture of relief and grief, as David wrapped his arms around her. The judge handed down a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for Officer Goodhead, citing the egregious abuse of power and the devastating consequences of his actions. The courtroom erupted in applause and tears from Anita's supporters. The verdict wasn't just a victory for her, but a resounding statement that justice could prevail. The police department, under intense public scrutiny, announced sweeping reforms, and several officers implicated in covering up Goodhead's abuses were suspended or dismissed. Weeks later, the community of Westwood gathered in Freedom Park for a rally to honor Anita's journey and the life that had been lost. The crowd, thousands strong, held candles that flickered in the evening breeze, creating a sea of light and unity. Anita, standing on a small stage with David at her side, stepped forward to address the crowd. Her voice was steady, though her eyes shimmered with tears. I stand here today as a mother who lost her child to hatred and cruelty. She began, her voice carrying through the silent crowd. That pain will never leave me. But in that pain, I found something I didn't expect. A community that refuses to give up. A community that stands together, even in the face of injustice. You all gave me strength when I thought I had none left. And together, we've proven that love is stronger than hate. She paused, looking out over the faces of those who had marched, chanted, and fought for justice. My child's life may have been taken, but their spirit lives on in this movement, in every voice that said, enough. And because of you, no mother will ever have to face what I faced alone. The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices blending into a powerful roar of solidarity. As the rally continued, a group of local artists unveiled a mural painted on the side of a nearby building. It depicted a vibrant tree, its branches extending upward in a flourish of color, each branch bearing small, glowing lights representing lives impacted by Anita's fight. At the base of the tree were the words, "Justice for Anita," and "Protect our mothers." In the final moments, Anita and David stood before the mural, their hands clasped tightly as children ran and laughed nearby, filling the air with hope and renewal. The camera panned out, showing the mural, the rally, and the unity of the community. Anita's voice, calm and resolute, resonated in the background. This isn't just about my story, it's about all of us. Together, we are stronger than the injustice that tried to break us. Thank you for joining Anita's powerful journey. Your support means everything. Don't leave without liking, sharing this story in your community, sharing your thought, and subscribing. See you in the next video.